24 Hours of Pass Summit Preview 2018. We're excited you could join us today for Devin Knight's session on digital storytelling with Power BI. Just kind of as an intro, these 24 Hours of Pass happen multiple times through the year, and there are 24 consecutive live webinars that are put together by community speakers within PASS. This one is for a preview of the sessions that'll be coming up at the PASS Summit later this year in Seattle in November. All of these sessions are recorded and will be posted online after the event, so you'll receive an email when that happens. If you've registered for this, as if you're sitting here, you're already registered, so you will get an email once that's available. I'm Steve Wake. I'm the moderator of the session. Actually worked with Devin years ago back at Pragmatic Works and kept in touch quite a bit over time, so know Devin well and the team there at Pragmatic Works, and definitely recommend them for any kind of consulting work you need out there. And for me, I'm actually in Denver, Colorado, and I'm currently a BI developer with an environmental engineering firm called Brown & Caldwell. So if you need any kind of wastewater treatment plants or reservoirs, look us up. We're out there to do that for you. But with that, I'll just go through a couple more slides and then hand it over to Devin here. So first off is going to be just some technical assistance for you while you're going through the session here. If you have any issues with the webinar, you can actually use the question pane that's on the right side of your screen, and someone, either me or someone else in the session, can help you out with any problems you're having. You can also use that question pane to ask questions throughout the presentation that you have about the technical content, and then either I will answer them in the chat, or if there's enough people asking the same question, I'll hold them until the Q&A portion at the end for everyone to then hear the answer from Devin. You can also zoom in on the presentation just by using the zoom bar at the top of the presentation window, so make sure you do that if you're having trouble seeing the content. And then you'll also be, when you go to exit the session, there will be a short evaluation that you can fill out, so please make sure you give us your feedback on that so that we can use that to make everything better. So just know that that's going to happen as soon as you close the webinar window. Next thing, we would like to actually say thank you to Quest for sponsoring this event. Without our sponsors like Quest, we can't do any of these kind of events. They do take a lot of effort behind the scenes to put together, and especially to make them free of charge for you. So make sure that if you're out there looking for any kind of software to help manage your SQL Server systems, your database environments, that you look up Quest for that kind of help. And then just as a reminder of other things that PASS has to offer, there's a bunch of free online resources, newsletters, and of course the main website is pass.org. Make sure you look that up as you have for registering for this event, but know that there are other events going on, including, as I mentioned before, the PASS Summit that goes on every year. This year it's November 6th through the 9th in Seattle. I'll be there, and I know Devin will be there as well, presenting and speaking, so make sure you sign up for that if you can, make it out to Seattle. But then there's also local user groups all over the world, same for SQL Saturdays. So SQL Saturdays are usually free training events held typically on Saturdays, but not always on Saturdays. So feel free to check the calendar for that at sqlsaturday.com to look up what ones are in your area. And then there's also virtual groups if you can't actually attend in person. There's marathon events that are held occasionally for business analytics. And then there's just being a volunteer like what I'm doing to moderate sessions and all kinds of other things within PASS. So make sure you look up all that kind of stuff at pass.org for information on those. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Devin to do his intro and his presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you for the kind intro. Steve is right. We've been friends for a long time. I'm going to go ahead and hopefully make this a little bit more interactive. I'm going to share my webcam, so you have to see my ugly face there. I want to welcome you guys for the 24 Hours of PASS today. Many of you have probably already been in several sessions and probably just hopped over to this one. My name is Devin Knight. I am the training director here at Pragmatic Works. And at Pragmatic Works, we do quite a few things. We do consulting and training now. And the training division is very focused on Microsoft Data Platform, the different types of data platform from SQL Server. We also cover some Azure content, which we're expanding quite a bit this year, and a ton of Power BI. We have 10 different Power BI courses that are available that might interest you. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and have been for a few years now. And I'm an author of 6, about to be 7 books. And the latest book that's going to be coming out here shortly is a new Power BI book. Real quickly on our session, let me transition into our session here. We're going to be looking at topics around data storytelling or digital storytelling within Power BI and the tools and the feature set within inside of Power BI that help allow you to do storytelling. And this is a bit of a preview, like Steve said. This is most of the sessions that you're going to attend, or many of the sessions that you're going to attend, are a preview of some of the things that are going to be coming out during PASS Summit. And this is a preview of my pre-conference seminar that's going to be a couple days before the summit. There's a pre-conference seminar where I'm going to be spending a full day on this one topic. And so if you're really interested in this topic and you want to dig deeper into it, I'm going to tell you today in our 1-hour session here, maybe our 45-minute session here, we're just going to be scratching the surface on what's possible. I'm going to be mainly focusing on the feature set that's available, but during the day, the pre-con that we're going to have, we're going to be digging in much deeper into how these things all fit together with an end-to-end story, and we're really going to make them, we're going to enhance the models that we create to a point where they really, really do tell a great story. So today we're going to be focused again more on the feature set, the tools that are within inside of Power BI that help you tell stories. But then later on, you're going to see that we're going to have the ability to actually see end-to-end results and how it can be done. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and show you real quickly our agenda. Our plan for today is, again, focus on the feature set. So you can see our agenda is to look at things like Drillthrough and how Drillthrough works, bookmarks and how bookmarks can be enabled on your reports to be able to have multiple views of your reports. We're also going to look at things like the selection pane and how that integrates with the bookmarks capabilities to enhance the usability of your story you're trying to tell. We're also going to look at Spotlight. Spotlight's actually one of the things that you're seeing on my little GIF that's showing up on the screen now. Spotlight's the one that kind of highlights a particular visual, so we're going to look at that. And then we're going to wrap it up with report page tooltips. Report page tooltips are one of my favorite new features, and they're a really cool feature that allow you to be able to have full control over what's shown in the tooltips that are part of Power BI. So this is kind of our plan for today. Again, the pre-con is going to go much more in depth into this, and I should mention that the pre-con is also going to have 3 speakers, including myself. We're going to have several different scenarios that we show you, and this is, again, giving you an idea of at least the features that we're going to show in that pre-con, that full day pre-con. We're going to look at several different data sets and show end-to-end how you can actually build out from them. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the first topic here, Drillthrough. So Drillthrough is a cool feature that you probably have at least played around with a little bit. Hopefully you've gotten a look at it. Drillthrough gives you the capability to go from one report to another. So the idea being that I want to be looking at perhaps a summary report or a higher level report, and I want to be able to drill into my next level of detail. Maybe I want to go into a more detailed view of the data. And so I might start with something like a summary report, and then be able to right click on a certain value that's inside of a chart, or in this case, a map you can see on my screenshot, and have that allow me to drill into a more detailed view of the data. Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of look at here. And you can have multiple drill throughs set up on a particular visual. There's a lot of cool ways that you can play with this feature. In fact, they've made some enhancements of this feature as of late as well. That enhancement is you can now put measures into drill through. So there's some nice things that they've integrated and made. In addition to what's been there previously, they've made some additions into the drill through feature. So we're going to look at drill throughs as one of the first features we're going to look at. And the way we're going to start this first set of demos is I'm actually going to go pull some data from the web. Now, if you've seen me present before, I like this example I'm going to show you. I show it a lot. So if you've seen me present before, this probably isn't a first time seeing this data set that we're going to work with. But I'm going to go ahead and bring over a web browser. And if you want to follow along later and try and find where I'm pulling this data, we're going to be pulling it from the US government website. If you want to find it probably really easily, is you can go to explore.data.gov. If you go to explore.data.gov, that'll redirect you to the site that we're going to be using today. It's redirects you to category.gov/datasets. And we're going to search for a data set from the government's website, the US government's website, that has failed banks data. So here's kind of the scenario. I want to set the stage here for you a little bit. I work for a bank is my scenario. And while I work for this bank, we're trying to decide where we're going to open up our next banking center, right? So, with the prevalence of online banking and just the general less use of certain banking centers, we want to be really selective on where we open up our next banking center. And so we want to pull in all the data that we have internally, but we also want to see if there's any external data that we're not thinking about and see if that external data might help us in making a decision about our choice. Where do we want to open up our next bank, right? So we have a choice. We have to figure out where that next bank is going to be. And we want to see if there's anything that might discourage us from certain cities or certain areas of the country. And so I'm going to pull from the US government website here. There is a FDIC failed bank list here. And if you search for FDIC failed banks list, you should see pop up here a list here that has a list of all the failed banks. And if I select this, you can see this is failed banks as of October 1st, 2000. I'm going to go ahead and select this list. And from here, you can see that there is a comma separated file that we can choose from. There's a CSV file. But one of the really cool things about how Power BI works is if I wanted to, rather than actually downloading this file, I could pull the link of where the file is located. So I could just come over here where the download link is, right click on that and copy the link address or copy the shortcut, as opposed to actually downloading it locally. I could get the address or the URL where that file is stored. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and select by right clicking on the download link. I'm going to select copy link address. And now I have in my clipboard the link for where that file is stored. The idea behind that is I don't want to have to constantly come back and re-download this data. I want to actually take what the government's providing to me here and just refresh with inside of Power BI. And anytime I do a refresh, it actually pull in the latest version of the data. All right, so I'm going to take the link that I have, bring that over to Power BI. And I have several other Power BI desktop files open. I'm going to show you a bit later. But we're going to go bring this into our Power BI desktop by going up to the Get Data section here. And I'm going to select Web as my data source. So we got to start by getting some data in, of course, and then we'll get to the storytelling features. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in this link that I just copied a few moments ago and hit OK. Now, there's a lot of fun stuff we can do inside the query editor. You're going to see the query editor here launch in just a moment. When I hit edit, that's going to launch open the query editor. There's a lot of fun stuff we can do in here. But for the sake of this presentation, we're really not too focused on the query editor or the Power Query editor. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on what can be done inside the query editor, although I will make a few manipulations on it. I'm not going to dig deep into what I'm doing. I'll kind of do some things in here to set myself up for the storytelling capabilities, but I'm not going to linger too long inside the query editor. What I will go ahead and do is I'm going to rename this query. I'll call this failed banks. And I'm going to modify a few of these things. So there's only a few of these columns I actually want. So I want the bank name, the city, the state, and the closing date. So let me select the closing date here. And all of the other columns in here I don't care about. So I'm going to right click on any of the ones I selected and remove all the other columns. So I'll say I want to remove other columns here. And that leaves me with the 4 columns I actually do care about. The other thing that I'd like to do in here is I want to manipulate these a little bit more in that, one, I only really want the year out of the closing date. I have the whole date here if I wanted to, but because this is a date data type, the Power Query Editor actually gives me some contextual transforms that I can use. So for example, if I right click on the closing date column and go down to transform, you'll see there's a feature here where I can tell it, how do I want to transform this date? Well, I can transform it into a year, into a quarter, into a month, week, day. You kind of get the idea. I'm going to make this into just a year and just return back the year from that column. I don't want the original date anymore. I just want to kind of roll this up to the year level. The other thing that I want to do is I want to return back the city and state combined together, kind of this concatenated value. And the reason why I want to do that is, if you think about it, there's probably several cities that exist in multiple states. So I'm from the city of Jacksonville, Florida. Well, if you're from the southeast of the United States, you probably are aware there's multiple Jacksonvilles throughout the country. There's a Jacksonville, North Carolina, there's a Jacksonville in several other states as well. And so because of that, I want to really specify which city these are. I want to make it a little bit less ambiguous rather than just having city by itself. I'm going to bring together city and state together in their own column that concatenate together. So to do that, it's pretty simple. I'm going to start by actually duplicating these columns. So that way, if I ever want to get back to the original city or the original state column, I'll have that available. So to duplicate a column, all you have to do is right click and select duplicate. And I'll do the same thing to state here. And I could have done the same thing to closing date if I wanted to. I could have kept the original date, but in this case, I really didn't care about the original date. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone. All right, then now that I have a duplicate of city and a duplicate of state, I'm going to select both of those, and the order that you select these does matter. So I'm going to start with city and then multi-select state. Right-click on one of those two selected columns, and I'm going to merge these together. So I'm going to select this merge column feature that allows me to merge these two columns together. And I'm going to tell it that I want to have a separator between these two columns whenever I merge them together of a comma and a space. And I'll go ahead and name this city state. Now I'm doing some of these parts a little quick, so don't worry about trying to follow me along on this part, because again, this isn't our main focus of our session. This just is some of the things I need to do to get us set up to get to our storytelling features. The only other thing I could do is I can come through here and rename some of the columns if I wanted to. So I could rename this year. I could get rid of some of the other columns. It's fine. I'm going to leave the other ones as is. And I'll go ahead and go up to the top left and hit close and apply to bring this now into our report pane. All right, so I should see now that I've hit close and apply, it's going to bring in the data set into the field list over here on the right-hand side, and I can start to build some visuals on top of this. And so some of the fun things I like to do with this data set is see if anybody can figure out which state might have the most failed banks. And unfortunately, this is a virtual session, so it's hard to get some nice interaction here, but think to yourself at least, which state do you think has the most failed banks? And usually, most often, people don't get this right. It's a little bit surprising to see which state has the most failed banks. So let's see if we can determine what it is here in our report. So I'm going to bring in, into our report, I'm going to bring in the state column. And I want to see a count of the failed banks by state. So I'm going to bring this into something like a bar chart, make it really simple into a nice bar chart here. And I'll bring in the count of the banks into my value section. And so what I can see as I do that, it creates a bar chart here for me, which if you can't see that, there's some settings we can do, of course, to adjust the way we can visualize the labels. But on the left-hand side right now, you can see that Georgia and Florida are the top two as far as number of failed banks, which might surprise you. Florida was a surprise to me. That's my home state. I don't know if I should be excited or not. We're second in something there, but it's not really something good. So you can see here and dig into the data a little bit more. Maybe I actually want to see which years caused those number of failed banks to increase. If I want to see something like that, then I can drag in the year column into my legend section, and then I can see it split up each of my bars in my bar chart based on the year. Now, one of the things that it did, as soon as I did that, as soon as I brought in the year as my legend, it actually resorted my data. So if you don't like the way it resorted your data, you can of course change this by going underneath the ellipses next to the top right-hand corner of the visual. And you can tell it that you want to resort this by the total count of failed banks rather than the state name, because right now you can see it's sorting it by the state name, but in reality, we want to sort it by the count of failed banks here. So we can flip that and see it resort it properly again. We can also do some things like this. If we want to, we can actually increase the font size here. So that's all stuff that you can certainly go under the format section, and you can bump up the font size. You can adjust things like that very easily within inside of your visual. So I can bump up the different axes here. So I'm bumping up the y-axis so it's a little bit easier to see. You can also bump up the x-axis if you want to be able to see that and read that a little bit more as well. All right, great. So we've got our first visual in here. Now, my goal in this first example is I want to be able to build a summary report that's all focused on state information. And then I want to be able to drill into a certain state and have that take me to a more detailed report. Okay. And because we only really have an hour together, what I'd like to do is I'm going to, again, focus on the features. And then I'm going to show you at a high level how I would suggest really enhancing this, making it more visually appealing, because that's what we're going to show during our pre-con in November in Pass Summit. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to name this first report my report summary. And so I can do that by going to the bottom left where you see the report page name. Right now it's called page 1. And I can rename this and we can call this something like report summary. Okay. And then I'm now going to create a second report page by hitting the plus button down here in the bottom right, bottom left, I mean. And I'm going to rename this one. We can really rename it whatever we want, but I want to rename this one Drillthrough just so it's really clear as to what we're doing with it. Now, my goal is I want to make it so that my users can right-click on a particular section of the bar chart. So maybe they right-click on the year 2009 for Georgia. And when they right-click on it, I want them to see an option here called Drill Through that allows them to go drill through to a more detailed view of that same exact data and be able to see which banks failed in that year in that state. So to do that, we're going to go over to our new report page that I just created called Drill Through. And we're going to use this to be able to create more detailed reports information. So we might bring in something like a table here. I'll drag in a table real quickly, and I'll resize this, and we'll bring inside of our table more detail information. So I might bring in here something like the city, state, the name of the bank, and maybe the year that it failed. And of course, we'll increase the size of that so you guys can actually read that. Now, some of the things that we could do, by the way, to enhance this is we could use things like report themes. And if you play around with report themes, the idea is you can import a theme file and it automatically update all your visuals to have the appropriate font size, font color, font type, font family, that sort of thing. Because you notice every time I bring in a new visual, I'm bumping up the text size immediately. It might benefit me to actually have a theme created ahead of time to do a lot of those things for me. So that's one thing I should be aware of. The other thing I should be aware of is as I bring in certain visuals, they're going to show me issues with my data. For example, what I mean by that, it's not really an issue so much with my data, it's more of an issue with my model. You might notice that it looks like the year column here is actually aggregating. So what's happening here is because the year column is a numeric value, Power BI assumes that I want to aggregate it. And so if I want to fix that, I can select the year column over my field list, and I can tell it that I don't want to summarize the year column anymore. There's two ways you can do that. One, you can do it on just the visual. If I go over to the visual fields, I can tell it that I don't want to summarize it just for this one visual. But if I don't want to summarize it for any visual, not even just this one, but any others that I might add in the future, you can select the year column and then go up to the modeling ribbon to turn off the default summarization from sum to don't summarize. And that allows you to make sure that it does not summarize this value in the future whenever I go to bring this into any new data visualizations. All right, so I'm going to flip this to don't summarize. There we go. So any new visuals won't summarize either. The last thing I'm going to do on this drill through report is I'm going to bring in a map. And so I'm going to give myself a little bit more real estate here, and I'm going to bring in a regular map here. And inside this map, I'm going to bring in the count of failed banks to represent the size of each bubble on this map, and then the city-state column to represent the data points that appear on the map. So if I drag in city-state into the location, we're going to notice initially that it actually does not visualize any of these data points. And the issue here in this case of why it's not visualizing any of these points is because we've told it that our location is a city and a state, right? So we've told it that the city-state Jacksonville, Florida is what we want to visualize on our map. That's fine, but the problem with that is if we want to do something like that, we also need to specify within inside the data model to tell it that what type of data category this is that we're trying to bring into the location. Now, if you think about it, it seems like you're trying to specify a city, so you would mark it as a city. But in reality here, it's not just a city, it's a city and a state. And so because we're really dealing with two types of fields, what you would do is you would select the city-state, go up to the modeling ribbon once more. Let me zoom in on this for you. And underneath the data category this time, we're not going to tell it that it's a city. We're actually going to use the place property. And the reason why we're going to use the place property here, again, is because it's not a city, it's not a state, it's really both. And so what place will do is if you mark it as a place, let me go ahead and do this here, and you'll see that the data points will start to visualize on the map after doing that. If we specify this as a place, you're going to start to see these places initiated and shown on the map. And basically, when we mark it as a place, that allows Bing to be able to plot out however you would have found it if you had just plugged it into like the Bing search. All right, so we're seeing all these data points plotted out here. You can, of course, zoom into the map, and you can see there's a big majority of these, or a big chunk of them at least, not a majority, but a good chunk of them showing up in Chicago. There's a lot in the Southeast, a lot in the Atlanta area here. There's a lot in the kind of Miami-Dade area down here. So there's a lot of them showing up here. But what I want to do is, again, my goal was to use the drill through to hop from one report into this more detailed report to see this information. Now, to enable drill throughs, that's going to be done in the bottom right-hand corner of Power BI, the Power BI desktop. So let me show you that down here. And this section of the Power BI desktop is where you can enable drill through. So for example, if I wanted to be able to drill through on state or the count of failed banks or something like that, you can drag and drop, let's say the state column for this example. And if you drag and drop state into the drill through section, that would allow me to drill through from any other report to this one based on that column. So if I right click on any visual that has the state column in it, that would allow me to now drill through to this report, and it would use the state that I had selected as a filter into my detail report here. So let me show you how this works. If I were to drag and drop in my state column down into the drill through section down on the bottom here, you'll see that this now has the state column populated into the drill through section. I'm going to talk about this property right above it here in a few moments, but for now, let's leave it alone. And we're going to go back over to the report summary page and test this out. So the way that the drill through works is now I can go over to my bar chart that we designed earlier, and I can right click on any one of the visuals. So I can right click on any of the data points, I should say. So say, for example, I want to drill into Florida for the year 2009 and see the 14 banks that failed in Florida. I can right click on the state of Florida for that particular data set point, go down to drill through, which is now here, that wasn't there earlier. And then it's going to show the report name. In my case, I happen to call the report drill through, and it's also a part of a drill through. But if I select that, I can drill through to my more detailed report, and you'll see now I'm seeing only Florida results for the year 2009. So it's automatically picked up not only the state filter, but it also picked up the year that I happen to have cross-selected. So that's kind of how this works. And again, I can go back over to my report summary. I can right click on another. Let's say, for example, we want to look at Georgia in 2011. I can right click on Georgia, go to drill through, and drill through to that feature or that data point and see all the failed banks in Georgia for the year 2011. So pretty interesting. Now, there's a couple other things to note about this feature. One is you'll notice it automatically brought the year 2011 that I had selected across. So whenever I right clicked on a particular cross section, in this case, let's say I did Georgia 2009, you'll see that it automatically brings across the year. Even though I never made that part of my drill through to begin with, it automatically brought it through. And the reason why it did that is because of this little checkbox or this little on-off switch right here. This little on-off switch that says keep all filters, and it's automatically turned on by default, will automatically pick up any other filters that are part of the visual that you have selected. This feature was actually enabled a couple versions ago, so it's a fairly new feature, but I believe that's like a March or April, I think it's an April version, a feature that was initiated. But this allows Power BI and the drill through feature to automatically pick up anything else that's selected or that you have selected whenever you use the drill through. Now you can of course turn that off. Let's check out what this looks like if you turn it off. If I turn this off now and go back over to the report summary and right click on, let's say Georgia 2009 again, and do drill through, notice this time it does not just bring back the year 2009, it actually brings back all the years for that state. So this is really a question about how you want to design this. Do you want that feature? This is a design time question, not necessarily you should always do it or you shouldn't ever do it. This is more of a decision that you would make based on the design of your report. Do you want those extra filters to come along for the ride, or do you want to make it so that you want that you have to initiate that and tell it that, yeah, you can use state, but you can also use year. You can actually specify and drag in other columns into the filter section here if you wanted to, explicitly define year as a filter. That's your choice. You have the ability to choose that. I happen to like this new feature, this keep all filters. I like that, so I'm going to leave that on. But just note that's what's been added in here in a recent release of the last couple months. The other thing that drill through does that's interesting is it added a button on the screen for me. Now it's kind of hard to see. Power BI loves this little off-color gray, but in the top left, a new button was automatically added to the design surface for me right here. And what that button does is, as it kind of looks like, it's a back button. And what that button does is if I were to select it, so you do have to hold Control and click when you're inside the Power BI desktop. When you go to deploy this to the Power BI service, you just click on it and it interacts how you would expect it to. But from the Power BI desktop, I would hold Control, click, and that would take me back over to where I was, and I can go explore another area of the data here as well. So I can go drill through to another data set. Okay, so that's kind of how drill through works. Now, what I like to do with this little back button is I like to make it stand out a little bit more. So I'll select the back button and then go over to the fill section and tell it that I want to fill it with some kind of other color. Maybe I want to make it stand out with more of a red or something like that, so it really sets itself apart from everything else on the screen. and it's really obvious to my users what it can do. Now, the other thing that you likely would do whenever you're using Drillthrough is you would probably hide the report pages that are your Drillthrough pages. So what I mean by that is, when I provide this to my users, I'm probably want to force them to come through the report summary page here, where I'll have some other visuals. I might have something like a line chart here, where I'm looking at the total count of failed banks by year, something like that. I might have multiple visuals here, and I might want to force my users to come to this page rather than jumping over to the drill through, because the drill through I really want them to only get to whenever they select or right click on a value inside the bar chart. So if you want to hide a report page, that's pretty simple to do as well. All you have to do is right click. Sorry, the interface there is wigging out a little bit. But if you right click on the report page, you can then select hide. And if you hide the page, you'll notice it kind of grays itself out there a little bit. And when it's grayed out, that indicates that it's a hidden report page that you can see while you're in the Power BI desktop. But when you go to deploy this and your users are interacting with it, they won't see that page at all. Okay, so that's our first filter called drill through, or our first feature called drill through. Pretty nifty little feature that allows you to really drill deeper into the data, as the name implies. All right, let's flip back over to the slides. All right, so the next set of features we're going to look at is called bookmarks. And we're going to look at bookmarks and the selection pane together. These two features really go together. And what the bookmarks are, if you haven't played with these a ton yet, bookmarks are basically the ability to, and I really don't like using this name, a snapshot. It's not really a great name for, nomenclature that I should be using, mainly because snapshot has other meanings if you're talking about other things with inside of SQL Server or just databases in general. But that's kind of what it does. If you're using the bookmarks feature, it kind of takes a bookmark or a snapshot, if you will, of the way that your report looks. And you're allowed to basically take these little bookmarks or add these little bookmarks to your reports, and it saves the way that your reports are visualized whenever you're working with them inside of the Power BI desktop or when you deploy to the Power BI service. So the idea of this is, maybe I want to apply a certain filter to my report, take a bookmark, and then make some other changes to my report and take another bookmark and allow my users to kind of toggle back and forth between the two different ways of interacting with the report. Now you can do bookmarks on slicers, you can do bookmarks on filters, and focus mode, spotlight, and sorting are all features that you can actually enable bookmarks on. And I'm going to show you some examples of how this works. When you create bookmarks, you also have the capability of creating or almost playing through each of the bookmarks. There's a little animation feature where you can play the bookmarks and see what each of them look and kind of toggle back and forth between all of them that you've created. And you can create as many as you want. You can update them once you've created them. So if you realize you need to make a change to one of them, you can certainly update them. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with bookmarks. And we're just going to scratch the surface of this today. There's a lot more, hopefully, that your imagination will get moving a little bit as I show you the basics of this feature. All right, the other thing that we're going to look at that's really in conjunction with bookmarks is called the selection pane. And the selection pane is really there to be able to either hide or show visuals on your report. And the way we're going to leverage this is we're going to hide or show both images that we're going to put on our report as well as certain visuals as well. And so we're going to use this in combination with bookmarks. We're going to show a few visuals, hide them, and then show some other ones, and then make it so that the bookmark controls which visuals our users see. Okay. One other tip for you here that you'll see as we work with the selection pane, you'll notice in the screenshot, especially that I have here, that the names are pretty terrible generally. Whenever you work with the names inside of the selection pane, they pick up whatever the title of your report visual is. And so one of the little tips that I give whenever I'm showing this feature is you may actually want to change the title of your report visuals. And when you change the title, that's how they are going to appear in the selection pane. And it really does help you be able to determine which visual is which when you're working with them. Because otherwise, how do I know which image I'm about to hide or show, or which visual I'm about to hide or show here? All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this one. We'll also look at a feature called Spotlight. Let me bring this one up really quickly. Spotlight is an interesting feature in that it allows you to emphasize or highlight certain visuals at any point in time. And the way the screenshot shows it here is you can actually put emphasis on something like this map if you wanted to, and you can make it so that when a bookmark is initiated, that the spotlight is really the focal point of your report. And so what some people will do is they'll make it whenever you click on a button, for example, you can click on that button and it'll put emphasis on a particular visual that you want your users to see. Okay, so we'll take a look at how Spotlight works as well. All right, so let's go ahead and hop into a demonstration of these couple features here. What we're going to show here, and we're going to continue to use this report, and what I'd like to do is on this visual, I'm going to change this to a column chart just for the purposes of what we're doing here. And I want to set the stage for this one as well. So here's kind of our storyline around why we would use this set of features, at least for this purpose. Is I work with a set of very low-tech users, right? I work with a bunch of people that they even still like to have reports printed and put on their desk every morning. And so I can provide to them all sorts of graphs and gauges and maps and things like that. And they're going to say, oh, yeah, this is great. Can you just show it to me in a table? That's going to be their go-to, is they want to see it in a table. They're not big on dashboards and things like that. So what I'd like to do is I want to provide to those users the ability to choose what type of visual is available to them. And so inside of this report, even though I have this nice column chart here, I want to give them the ability to toggle back and forth between whether or not they're seeing this as a column chart or as a regular old table. And so I want to give them that capability where they can choose what's most appropriate for this point in time, basically. All right, so to do that, I'm going to bring in another visual, a table. And inside this table, I'm just going to show some basic information. And it's okay that it's on top of the other one for now. I'm going to show inside of this one the states and the count of failed banks. So let's make sure this is showing a count of failed banks here. Basically the same information that we have on the column chart right now. And I'm going to bump up the size of this a bit so that we can see what we're showing for this demonstration. Okay, good deal. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sort this as well. And now we have basically the same information that's inside of that column chart is now also part of this table. And what I'd like to do, again, the goal here is give my users the ability to choose what type of way that information is visualized. Do they want to see it in a column chart or do they want to see it in a table? And I want to not necessarily have to create multiple reports for each of my users that have certain preferences. I want to make it so that this report can really be fit for all users, whether they like the column chart or they like tables. I want to have them have the capability to choose which one is best for them. All right, now to do that, I'm going to actually bring in a couple images that I've created. Now these images aren't anything fancy. You can certainly go online, search for like website buttons, and you can actually create some images like this yourself very easily. In fact, you can probably create them better than I did. But I've got a couple images that I've created that look like buttons. And so let me show you what they look like. I'm going to go ahead and bring in from my presentation folder here. All right. And I have one here called column button that looks like this. Okay. And I have another one called table button that we're going to go import as well. That looks like this. And so I'm going to create and place both of these basically on top of each other right here. And the column button and the table button are going to be used, and they're just images, by the way. They're going to be used to toggle back and forth and choose which visual do I want to see. If I want to see the column button, I'll click on column. If I want to see the table button, I'll click on table. So the way to make this work is we're going to leverage both the selection pane that I mentioned in the slides as well as the bookmarks pane. Now you likely don't see those by default. So to turn those features on, you're going to go underneath the view pane. And underneath the view pane, you're going to check off, let me go ahead and zoom in on this for just a moment. You're going to go ahead and check off the selection pane right here as well. I'm sorry, that's the bookmark pane, but yeah, you want that. And you're also going to select the selection pane. So check off both of those features underneath the view menu to be able to see those features for what I'm going to demonstrate here next. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and check off bookmarks and selection. And you can see those showing here on the right-hand side. And what I'd like to do is I want to leverage these two features. I'm going to minimize these other ones here for a moment so we can have more real estate. But I'm going to leverage these two panes on the right-hand side to be able to choose which visuals my users can see. Now, the way this works, you'll notice over here on the selection pane that the titles for all of these are pretty terrible. So what I usually will do is I'll actually select the visuals and go over to the format section and give them a better title. And by giving them a better title, I'll actually turn on the title here for a moment. By giving them a better title, it's easier for me to see what they are. So in this case, I've turned on the title. I can call this a table. It looks like it's already called table here, so this one's not as confusing as the other. But if I wanted to, oh, I lost my selection there. Let's try that one more time. Let's try that once more. There we go. You can turn on the title, give it a title of some kind. And again, in this case, it looks like it already had the title called table. And then if you turn off the title, then it still retains that name. So for example, if I were to select the column chart here, go over to the title of the column chart and give it a better name, say for example, column chart. And my selection here is going a little wonky. Let's try that one more time. Column chart. There we go. And you can then turn off the title and it won't show the words column chart on the report, but it will show it in the selection pane. And so this is kind of a nice little trick to make it easier for you to actually determine what's showing up in the selection pane is give them a better title. I would do the same thing on the images. So on the images here, I would select the image, give the image a title. In this case, I'm looking at the table button. So I would call this table button. And again, it keeps moving around here on me. There we go. And then I would turn the title off, so it's not necessarily shown, but it is being used inside the selection pane. So I'll do the same thing here. I'll call this one column button. Let's go back to that. There we go. And then I can easily just turn the title off, so it's hidden behind the scenes, but I am still using it in the selection pane to know what each of these are. All right, so now that I've labeled them a little bit better, except for this one, that's okay, we don't need that one. Now that I've labeled them a little bit better, I'm going to go ahead and show or hide certain values. So for example, I'm going to hide the table button, and then I'm going to hide the table. So this looks like the column button is selected. It appears that I've already selected this, and I'm seeing the column chart below. And based on that combination of things that are shown and hidden, I will create a bookmark on this. So I'll add a bookmark here. And on that bookmark, I'm going to go ahead and rename it by double clicking on it. There we go. And I'll call this, maybe I want to call this something like my initial view of the report. Okay. And then I'll change things up. So now that I've created that first bookmark, I will switch things up and I'll hide, or I should say show the table button, hide the column button, show the table, and hide the column chart. And then I'll create another bookmark and I'll call this my table view. So now the way this is going to appear to my users is they can toggle back and forth between those two visuals. It looks like they're actually able to select the button and they're seeing different visuals based on that. Now, right now, we actually have yet to configure the actual button. So we actually need to configure the button so they can click on it. To configure an image to act like a button, so this is just an image that we brought in, but if we want to configure this image to act like a button, you can select the button or the image, go over to the Format Image section on the right-hand side, and turn on Action. Now, for my friends here in the room that have played around with things like reporting services in the past, you're probably maybe a little bit familiar with actions already. Actions are very similar to reporting services as they are here. And reporting services, if you created an action, it allowed you to click on something and hop to somewhere else. Inside of Power BI, an action is also clickable. So when I turn on an action here, I can then expand the properties of the action, and I can tell it that I want to, let me see if I can get the zoom in here right, that I want to change the type of action, and you're seeing a little bit of my PowerPoint there, that's okay. I want to change the type of action to a bookmark, and then I'm going to tell it that the bookmark is set to, what is it in this case? In this case, it's going to be the table view. So whenever someone goes to select, let me close that. Whenever someone goes to actually select on this button now, if they were to click on it, it's going to flip to the table view. And then I want to do the same thing on my other button. I'm going to go configure this button now to have an action to go to a bookmark, and this one's going to go to my initial view of the report. So here's how it's going to work now. Now my users can toggle back and forth and interact with this report just like it's almost like it's a web page, right? Now they can choose which way they want to visualize the data. And whenever this is deployed to the service, it's very interactive. It's very easy for them to choose which way they want to visualize the data. And I didn't have to take up any additional real estate on my report. In fact, I'm actually taking up less real estate here whenever I choose table. I might want to bring some other columns in there that are relevant. And you can do these bookmarks with other features as well. I happen to be doing it with an action here where I can see certain things, but you can also do bookmarks on filters, for example. So I can make it so that someone selects a filter and it changes the way the report looks. You can also, I think Reza, who's doing the next session today, has an interesting blog where he actually has a bookmark that clears all the filters. So he has a little bookmark or a button up in the top right that you can click on, and when you click on that, it clears all of the selections that you have so far, and it basically removes all of the filters that you've done thus far, which is a pretty cool way of doing bookmarks as well. This is just an idea, so this is a way to spark your imagination on what you can do with bookmarks. We're going to show you some really cool things with bookmarks that you can do in our pre-con later this year, but I wanted this to spark your interest a little bit. All right, so we got time for one more feature, and then I do have one other thing I want to show you as well. Let's move on to our last feature. The last feature that I'm going to show you is one called Report Page Tooltips. And with Report Page Tooltips, I'm going to go ahead and create another page here. Report Page Tooltips are a really cool feature that allows you to control the tooltips that appear whenever you hover above a report visual. So whenever I hover above this, you see a tooltip that looks like this. You can see tooltips when you hover above this visual as well. I want to have control over what appears whenever I hover above something. And that can be done through Report Page Tooltips. So I'm going to come over here to our page 1. I'll call this a tooltip page. And when you select a new page, you'll want to turn it on as a Report Page Tooltip. Now, Report Page Tooltips are still in preview as of right now, but once you turn them on on the options menu, you can then turn on a page to be a Report Page Tooltip. That's done by going over to the Format section over on the right-hand side, and underneath Page Information, you can then turn it on, and it looks like in my scenario, I actually need to turn on the Preview feature. So I'd have to go underneath Options and Settings, and then Options, and then underneath the Preview features here, I would need to turn on, whichever feature I want, which in this case is really the Report Page Tooltips. So I'd hit OK, and it's going to prompt me to restart. So I'd have to do that real quickly. Let me go ahead and save what we've done so far. I'll just save this on the desktop, and we'll call this 24 hours have passed. And I'll close and reopen, and we'll take a look at this. Now, while I'm closing and reopening, I'm going to show you one other thing here as well. One of the things that we're going to highlight in our pre-conference is the ability to do different styles and layouts within inside of your report. I would highly recommend, if you, they haven't paid me to do this or anything. In fact, all the stuff that I'm going to show you here is free. I'd highly recommend that you take a look at our friends at powerbi.tips, their website. They have a couple really cool things that would help quite a bit when it comes to storytelling. One of them is they have a theme generator, and the theme generator they have is really good, where they will basically output a theme file for you, a JSON file that you can then import into your reports. And when you import that into your reports, any of the let's say the font type, the font color, the size, all those things, even particular settings to different visuals, will be picked up in that JSON file and automatically applied to your reports. That's one thing that's really cool they have. The other thing that I really like that they have is they've been designing these different layouts, and they have them all out here for free, just so you can take a look at them and download them and try them for yourselves. And these layouts are really cool. Check this out. I've actually downloaded a couple of them ahead of time. This is one that I highly recommend. I think it's really cool. You'll see Microsoft actually uses this one quite a bit. But this is a layout, and basically it's a background that they've designed. And if you go look at the background of the report, you can see they have a little image in the background, and you can make your own image. And then what they've done is they've actually built some report visuals around the background, and they've even done some bookmarks in here as well. So I can click on values in here, and you can see it actually takes me to other report pages when I click on things. And these bookmarks are really nifty. This is some of the kind of stuff that I'm going to show you how to do inside our pre-conference seminar. So that's one example of how these work. I have a couple other ones here I do want to highlight very briefly that I think are really cool. This is actually similar to one that I'm going to show in the pre-con. This is another one that shows you how you have little tabs on the right-hand side, and I can kind of hop back and forth between the different values here and see different reports shown based on the selection on the left-hand side. So it's almost like you create this little navigation bar that you can choose from, and when you select that navigation bar, it allows you to hop to different report pages. So it's a really cool feature as well. So again, the idea of how they did this was there's a background. So they created a background image, and on that background image, it has a lot of the layout and the view of how this is supposed to look like. And then it allows you can kind of hop back and forth between the different values here. So layouts are pretty cool, and that website has a lot of cool things in it as well. All right, last thing to show you here is the tooltips. Again, one of my favorite features. So let me make sure I have a few moments here to show this. To enable the report page tooltips, again, you have to first turn on the preview feature. Then once you turn on the preview feature, you'll need to turn tooltips on for this report page. So I'll flip it on. The other thing that you likely want to do is change the report page size, because if I were to use this report design surface as a tooltip, it would be way too large. And so you can change the tooltips or the page size here by going underneath the page size section. And you'll notice there's even a tooltip size that you can enable that's specifically designed for tooltips. You can also adjust this size, so you can change this so that it fits into a more small interface. This is actually what the real size is going to look like here, but I'm going to keep this large while we're interacting with it here for a few moments. So on this report page, I'm going to bring in a quick map, and we'll wrap up on this. And Steve, if you want to start queuing up questions, we will be done here in just a moment. But I'm going to bring in and kind of demonstrate here how these tooltips work. I usually also like to do something like maybe make the background color different, just so it stands out a little bit more. So maybe like a light gray or something like that. That's actually kind of a darker gray. And then I might turn off the title of this so it doesn't stand out as much. So I turned off the title there. And then maybe I do something like place a card in here. So I can place a card in here and show the total number of failed banks. And let's make that a count. And then I might make something like the text white, something like that. All right, so if I do that, this will give me the ability to more clearly see, let's make that white. This will give me the ability to more clearly see the way this visual is laid out. And I can change the name of this to something like total banks. And then let's finish this off by dragging into the tooltip area on the bottom. How do we want to filter this tooltip? So if we want to filter this based on state again, I can drop in state. And then now all I have to do is go interact with my other report pages. So for example, if I go look at the report summary and I hover above this column chart we created, you'll notice that it's automatically filtering to the particular areas that we have selected or hovered above. So you have the ability to turn on these tooltips, and when you hover above any of the areas that you're filtering, you'll see that it automatically hops over not only the map, but also the little card is adjusted based on the selection. Now you'll notice that this one on the right-hand side is not using that tooltip because there's actually the ability to purposely not use it on certain visuals. But if you want to turn it on, you can select the visual, go under the format section, and you'll see there's an area here where you can adjust the tooltip and tell it to use my tooltip report that I just created. And then when you hover above, you'll actually see all of the values show. And again, in this case, because there is no state in my line chart, you're actually seeing it show all the values just filtered based on the year that you have selected. All right, so let me pop back up the slides here for a moment. And Steve, I know we only have a few moments here, but let's pop this open in case there's any questions. And Steve, did you have any queued up ready to go?
So all the one, we only had 3, and all 3 of them I was actually answered and sent the response to everybody, but just so that everybody can see them, one of the big ones was where'd you get the data that you were playing around with? So the URL for that was https www.data.gov for everybody that wants to use that same failed bank data. And then one of the other ones was where do you go to create the custom buttons? And so I think that was just not knowing that it came from an image file that you had already found online and use. So I just made it clear that, yeah, you can just go out and use any image you find to be your buttons.
Yeah, that's right.
And the cool thing about it.
Yeah, real quickly, there is a button option that was fairly recently added. I think it was last month, not June, but they added in this button feature now. Unfortunately, these buttons don't really have a ton of options. There are a few, but yeah, so the images is a good way to kind of really customize them to what you need. Yeah, exactly.
Yep, exactly. Cool. And then the only other one was about parameterizing data sources that I put a pretty lengthy explanation on as far as using parameters in Power BI Desktop and then saving the file as a template file to then prompt people for those parameters. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah, so a little off from what we're talking about today, but yeah, so you have the ability to kind of parameterize your data set. Just to expand on that a little bit, if you wanted to, you could parameterize and say, for example, if I pulled in this file from the government website, but maybe I had my own version of the file, I could parameterize the location of the file and switch it back and forth by actually coming up to this edit query section. And if I had a parameter, I would be able to edit that parameter here. And then what Steve's talking about is there's a cool feature that's built into the Power BI desktop called templates. And I can actually create a really nice report like I have, this one, obviously I haven't gone through the effort of making it really sexy, if you will. It's very plain. But if I had more time and I applied a lot of formatting and I really liked it and I wanted to create a template out of it, I could then make that into a template by going underneath the file option, and I could export this as a template. And the template just stores the metadata of the model and the report. It's not storing any of the data itself. So it's storing in a what's called a PBIT file template. And you'll notice those files are way smaller than a normal PBIX file. That's because it's just storing the metadata of the report, not the actual underlying data. And whenever you, like Steve was talking about, you can create a parameter that whenever someone opens up the template, they provide the value. So say, for example, the location of the file, and it'll rebuild the report based on the value that you passed in. So it's a really cool way to kind of compartmentalize things and hand them off to other people if you wanted to. A really cool feature. I'm glad you were, yeah, thank you for answering that.
Sure, and the only other one that just popped up is somebody is asking where's a good resource to learn how best to use bookmarks.
Yeah, so I'll certainly plug myself a little bit. I mentioned early on that Pragmatic Works is a training company. So if you guys are interested, we certainly have some of our own training that we've built out. The thing that's unique about our training, as opposed to some of the stuff you can find for free, is we actually keep it up to date. So each month we actually go back and re-record things, we update things to make sure it's really clear on how to use them. You can certainly obviously find a lot of YouTube videos. I even post a lot of YouTube videos. But the downside of those is they're put out there and then they might be 2 years old, and Bookmarks hasn't even been around that long. So I would certainly recommend if you take a look at my my training offerings, if you go to pragmaticworks.com, or you can email me at dknight@pragmaticworks.com as well.
Great. All right, thanks, Devin. Stay tuned or switch over, I guess you have to the next webinar, which, as Devin mentioned, is ResaRad doing exploring sharing strategies in Power BI. So if you're interested in more on Power BI, check that one out. And yeah, other than that, thank you all for attending. And as Devin gave you his information, feel free to reach out to him, or you can reach out to me if you're looking for. My Twitter handle is just Steve Wake, my name, so it's nice and easy to remember. So thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks, everybody.